Welcome to Watching the Horizon. I'm Jake. A couple of days ago, I had a family member come to me and ask me about food storage. They were sort of new to the idea and they could sort of see the writing on the wall, and they could certainly feel with our current political climate as well as what's going on just culturally that the prepping bug, I feel, may have taken another victim. And they knew that I was kind of into it, and they came to me and asked, how do I get started with food storage? Actually, the question was, how do I get started prepping? And I responded with, a great place to start is food storage, then water storage, give or take, whichever one you want to do first. And they then asked me, well, how do you do food storage? Now, food storage, as many of you probably already know, is pretty much a cornerstone of the whole prepping philosophy. And so this video is for some of the beginners that are out there, and most specifically, it's for this particular family member. So here we go. I'm going to talk about the basic principles of food storage. Rule number one is store what you eat. Now, there's a couple of ways of going about obtaining your food storage. You could just go out and then just buy a whole bunch of food, whether it's freeze-dried or you just, go to the store and you just completely buy a whole new pantry. I mean, if you've got the funds for that, I say go for it. One of the more budget-friendly ways to do it is whenever you go shopping, just buy a little extra of what you already buy. This way, it's food that you like and you know you're going to eat it. So if you're out and you like, get yourself a couple cans of corn, get several cans of corn. Before you know it, you're going to end up with a really good supply of food. But most importantly is it's going to be food that you actually like to eat. Next, I would say you need to know how to actually prepare the food that you're stocking up on. For example, wheat. Do you know what to do with wheat? Wheat's one of those things that often makes its way into every prepper's pantry. But if we're talking about whole wheat berries, well, do you have the equipment necessary to do something with that? Do you have a grinder? Do you know how to actually handle that and how to use it in food and how to make stuff with it? I mean, are you just talking about wheat bread all day long? So it's important that if you are storing food, it would make sense, although sometimes people get caught up in the whole excitement of it all. You need to actually know how to prepare what it is that you're storing. Now, over time, tastes change, allergies develop, diets change. Perfect example is my parents. They over time they became allergic to certain things like milk and grains and wheat and that kind of thing. Kind of a bummer, we were a really big milk family, and then all of a sudden milk was a problem. So just as an example, what you store today, may not necessarily be what you're going to want to eat later on. Maybe you get some sort of gastrointestinal issue like Crohn's or irritable bowel, or maybe even like diabetes or something like that might develop. It's important to diversify, your preps. If you just get stuck with just a whole bunch of grain and that's really kind of your thing, and even if that's what you eat now, whole bunch of grain, well, if you're not really diversified and something should happen and all of a sudden you have to rely on your food storage, but then a couple of years ago you ended up developing celiac and all of a sudden you can't have gluten, but that's all you really have in your preps. life's going to be a bummer. So diversify your preps. Just keep in mind that tastes change. If you've got kids, maybe maybe one day they like a particular food, and then maybe the next day they think it's the worst thing in the world. So before you go stocking up on any one particular thing, like in really, really big bulk, just kind of keep that in mind. It's good to stock up on lots of different ingredients. That way, you can make lots of different things. But just it's sort of like that whole putting your eggs in one basket thing. You don't want to get stuck with too much in one direction. You're going to want to learn how to correctly store the food that you have. So if you've got a whole bunch of cans, you're going to treat that a certain way versus jars, versus if you have large bulk bins of like wheat and rice, that kind of thing. Different methods to store different things. So just be aware of those. That if you go out and let's say you buy a whole bunch of herbs or something like that, well, if the shelf life of herbs is really kind of short anyway, that's okay. You can still kind of stock up on it, but just know that you're really going to want to be sensitive to keeping it cool or keeping it out of the light, or maybe it has to be refrigerated or whatever. Just before you start really bulking up on anything in particular, just make sure that you understand the best way to actually store that food. You're going to want to make sure that you keep your food storage organized. This means you're going to need to keep some sort of inventory. So make sure that you're keeping track of what you're putting into the pantry as well as what you're taking out. So whether you do it with software or whether you use just a clipboard, however you do it, you're going to want to make sure that you're keeping track of what you have. Also, you're going to want to make sure that you're using your oldest stuff first. So some people have gone through the effort of buying or building, special racks that allow you to load from the top and it will automatically feed through so that the new stuff goes in the back and then the old stuff is always right up front. However you like to do it, just make sure that you're organized and you know what you have. Nothing worse than finding a really good deal on something, buying a whole bunch of it, going to the pantry, only to find out you already have like 10,000 jars of that very thing. You have just way overstocked on that one particular thing. And if you'd have just known, no matter how good a deal it is, if you'd already known that you already have more than what you need, then you could have taken that money and put it somewhere else. Maybe there was another sale. You could have waited for another opportunity. As I mentioned before, you're going to want to make sure that you rotate your food. To expand on that just a little bit, the reason is that cans last a really long time. It's also one of the most common ways that people store food. And some will argue that the expiration date on a can is just arbitrary and that canned food is going to last way longer than any date printed on those cans. They're probably right, but you're still going to want to make sure that you're eating the oldest stuff, because depending on the kind of food and even the manufacturer who did the actual canning, food has a tendency to lose its texture, lose its flavor, lose its nutritional value. There might not be anything wrong with the food. It's not going to make you sick and it's not going to, be bad for you in any way, but some foods will just not be as useful to you the older that they get, even though they taste okay, or maybe they just don't taste quite as good. So make sure that you rotate your food. Make sure that you're aware of what food needs to be rotated, faster, just so that you can stay organized. Now, storage conditions really do matter. I mentioned earlier, make sure you know how to store your food correctly, and that's obviously true with the different types of food that you have. General rule of thumb is that you're going to want to cool, dry place, out of the sunlight. That's why a lot of preppers will use like a basement or a pantry or a root cellar if they happen to have one. I cannot emphasize enough how much heat will actually take years off the life of your food. Uh, I knew one gentleman, he was in the process of moving, and all of his food storage was actually in boxes. And he had these boxes in his living room, and they were just kind of stacked from floor to ceiling. Uh, it was quite a sight to see because he had a lot of stuff and just boxes, this wall of boxes. And it was a particularly hot summer that year. And even though he had air conditioning, he had sort of vaulted ceilings. And so a lot of heat collected at the top of that room. And I pointed out, I said, hey, you know, even though you got the air on right now, it's probably at least, you know, 80, 85 degrees up at the top, maybe even more, depending, because his air conditioning was kind of struggling to keep up. And I said, you're really going to want to pull that down because the food inside, even though it's sealed in cans, heat will just take years off the life of your food. Something that was easily going to last, say, 10 or 15 years is now all of a sudden maybe only going to last a couple of years, or if that. Store it there for very long. Store it there for over an entire summer. I mean, how many times is it going to hit, you know, 80 or 90 degrees up there? And it's going to devastate the lifespan of your food storage. So really make sure that where and how you store your food, you pay extra special attention to that. Heat is your enemy. So is light. Keep it out of the sun. If your basement or your, you know, root cellar or whatever room that you end up storing this stuff has a window in it, and the sun comes in that window and kind of goes across, you know, all of your food storage, you're going to want to do something about that. Make sure that light, humidity, and heat, get rid of them. They'll just devastate your food storage. You're going to want to store probably more food than what you think. You've heard that 2,000 calories a day is the appropriate diet. And when you go out and do your food storage, however you end up purchasing it, some places offer food storage sort of kits. You can just buy 3 months worth of food for 2 people, or you can just buy 100 days of food. Well, if you look specifically at the number of meals that they have in these kits, as an example, they might say, oh, we're going to give you 3 meals a day, but really pay attention to the calories of those meals. On several of them, I feel like it's a scam, and they're trying to, it's just, I checked one of them out, I remember in particular, and it was like 600 calories per person. And they were boasting that it was a year's worth of food for 4 people. And I'm just like, that's ridiculous. That's such a scam. And it was expensive too. You could have easily taken the same amount of money and, you know, done some frugal shopping, and you could have probably actually gotten you know, a year's worth of food. But instead, they kind of wanted to take the shortcut, and it was a horrible deal. And I saw that same deal again, except this time it was with a different company, and I'm like, wow, this is how they're making their money. They're making the money by scamming you on the number of calories. So just really pay attention to the number of calories that you actually end up storing for. 2,000 calories a day probably isn't going to cut it. Even though right now, in this lifestyle where we all go to work every day, and, you know, some of us are probably overweight, or, you know, you want to eat healthy and that kind of thing, 2,000 calories, yeah, that's the recommended daily. Well, in a SHTF situation where maybe there's a lot of stress, or maybe the weather's bad. Maybe you're going to have to spend a lot of time outdoors doing a lot of work, just to survive. Those 2,000 calories a day is going to be like a drop in the bucket. So just sort of keep that in mind, and it's totally safe to store more food than what you're going to need. Be a good judge about what it is that you're actually going to do, but just understand that if we have a power outage and it happens to be in the middle of winter, for example, and now all of a sudden you're in the suburbs and you're sort of bunkering down and you have no way to heat your house, you're probably going to have to do a lot of walking. You're probably going to have to do a lot of outside physical labor to do what is necessary to heat your home. And you could easily burn, 5,000-6,000 calories a day, even more. And so just be aware of that. Lastly, I want to talk to you about the variety of what you purchase. Now, a lot of people sort of approach the whole idea of food storage as, this is emergency food. This is like the last of the last, and no matter what, I'll eat it. I'm not going to worry about storing what I like. I'm just going to store as much of the cheapest stuff as I possibly can. Beans and rice all the way. I can survive on that for a really long time. Ever been on a diet, like a really restrictive diet? Man, talk about sucking the fun out of life right there. When you find yourself stuck eating the same thing day in and day out, and let's say we're in a stressful situation. Maybe it's not even an shtf situation. Maybe you just lost your job and you're really having a hard time finding a new one. And just to add insult to injury, you're stuck with beans and rice for the next 6 months. Consider the morale of the group, your family, you. If all you have to look forward to is the same thing day in and day out, worst case scenario is you're going to get so bored with the food or upset with it, you're going to not eat enough. For myself, I know I could probably get away with that just fine. But the reality is that you're going to want to keep your spirits up. You want to make sure that your family's spirits are up. You want to make mealtime sort of like the last vestiges of hope, where you can still get together and enjoy something, even though everything else is maybe falling apart around you. At least you can have a treat. At least you can have something that you like. So have some variety. Get lots of different ingredients so that you can make lots of different recipes, and pay attention to those things that you just really like. Sorry about that. Battery died. Where was I? Right. You're going to want to make mealtime something to look forward to. Otherwise, what are you fighting for? What are you trying to persevere for? Things like depression can set in, or at least it can spread a lot more quickly. It's hard to keep your hopes up when something as simple as maybe a chocolate treat, could really kind of make or break the day. So definitely have a variety of food that you like. And anyway, that's just sort of the beginning basics of food storage. I hope this is helpful to some of you new people, and thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Keep your eyes open.